I read that you, about like 10 years ago now, had this massive career change, which I think is so fascinating from the corporate world going into the composing. So can you talk a little bit about that leap of faith essentially that you took and like how that has transpired for you now?
Mhm. Sure. So I hail from France, where I had a very classically trained. So it was a very kind of formal training into music. So I did a lot of piano. I was semi-professional when I was 17, and then I basically was told that if I didn't want to be a performing artist, like a performing pianist,
Mhm.
music was not for me. And I come from like a very like kind of small town in northern France where they're not necessarily aware of all the opportunities, I would say, like, programs, education that you can get in the Royal College of Music of London, for example, of that kind of stuff where you can have the composing or film scoring curriculum.
Mhm.
I was obsessed with film music already since I can as long as I can remember, I've been obsessed with film music when I was a kid. So it would have been kind of an easy guidance, but I didn't get that. So I ended up just quitting music, crying a lot over it, because I just thought that music was not for me, but I felt in my bones that it was what I wanted to do. So I ended up in advertising, communication, studying communication and journalism, and I ended up in tech at Google, where I spent 6 years, and then doing this doing this corporate life. I was invited to a corporate event with Google at Abbey Road Studios in London,
Mhm.
where I used to live at the time. And I was just in this mixing room, and there was an engineer who was kind of demoing what it meant, what it means to record a film score in the studio. So it was for the movie Fury, so with a score of Stephen Price that I've always been, obsessed with since then. And I just had an epiphany. It was like, this is where I belong. I don't know anything about how these wires work together, this monitors, all these things. I had no clue. I just knew that it was where I belong.
Mhm.
And then 2 days after, I quit my job and I started as a composer. And then for maybe, let's say, 5 years, it's been a lot of pitching, just sending my work all over the place, being approached by agents, working on advertising, library music, short films. And then, yeah, I just worked my way up from then. And, because I was 30, I had reported to people for 13 years already. I have been in big corporate world, and I was like, I'm not ready to report to someone again. So I was like, I'm just going to do this on my own. A lot of people told me to go and be an assisting, another composer, steps composer, or just go back to school. And I just, rejected all these, which was kind of crazy when I think about it. But so yeah, so I really started from nothing, and I take a lot of pride for just building this on my own from, basically zero. I mean, I had the background
Yeah.
in classical music, which is great and helps like a tremendous amount. But yeah, so that was the big leap. And then I guess it helped me a lot, to answer your question about how it influenced the process of becoming a composer full time. I think it basically, like the tech, I think, taught me how to present myself, in a good way. Well, it also taught me how to speak English because I just couldn't speak English before that. And then also just to how to, send my work to people in a good way. So being loud but not intrusive, being detailed but not too detailed, sending the right work, like just presenting well. So I think that really helped me tremendously. And today, still working on bigger projects and stuff, it helps me. It still helps me to this day to know how to read a room, how to create this connection, this bridge between the filmmakers and me, trying to understand what they're after, trying to, you know, um, not let my ego take over, that kind of thing, that you absolutely have the kind of skill that you have to have when you're in the corporate world.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think that's what it taught me.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And you got to score part of the Sea Lions show at Abbey Road. Is that the first time that you had been back since that fateful day?
So it was not the first time I actually I was invited, and it was just the strangest, weirdest thing is that I got an email a few weeks after I quit my job at Google from an engineer I'm so sorry for the little prompt that you can hear. I hope it doesn't
Oh no, I can't hear anything.
turn it off. Great. Um, I just got this email from an engineer, the head of engineering at Abbey Road Studio. His name is Marek. He's a really good friend now. He just said like, yeah, I heard about your work from like this random girl that I've met the other day, and if you want to come over, have a tour of the because you don't get to tour Abbey Road Studios. Like you have to get to be invited, or
Mhm.
you record, but and so it was so weird because it was completely independent, but it still happened quite at the same time. So I really had a very, very, very special relationship with Abbey Road Studios. So when it came to recording Sea Lions at Abbey Road Studios, in the actual studio too, where in this very mixing room,
Mhm.
ballroom, sorry, where I got this epiphany, it was really special. It was really like really a full circle kind of moment for me. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's so cool. You've scored some narratives and some documentaries. Do you find that there is a difference in terms of when you are writing for the two different types of storytelling?
Yeah, you know what? It depends on the, it depends, like when it comes to documentary, I think it really depends on the documentary. For a documentary like Sea Lions,
Mhm.
there is a strong narrative. There's a storyline. There's this little, Leo, and then you just follow him as he, grows in he's really tough but beautiful environments. And then you see him when he's a baby, and then when he's a teenager, and then when he gets the power that's required to own an island. And so there's a strong story behind it. So it is kind of very similar to a narrative or fiction
Mhm.
work. It's because and it's also Disney, right? So it's very, very, very much painted in the narrative world.
Mhm.
In some other documentaries, it kind of matters less because it's going to be more about specific scenes and, the wilderness where the stories are not necessarily connected, and so it's a very different take and very different journey, and in those cases I'm going to take one scene at a time, kind of separately, independently, more than for Sea Lions having this theme for Leo that grows with him throughout the film, and that's a very, very different take. Yeah.
I'm always curious when composers get brought on to projects because I feel like it varies immensely. But with something that is a nature documentary, I would imagine the production time for it is quite long. So were you like making pieces of this film while you were working on others, or did you come in when the narrative was shaped?
It definitely takes, I mean, first of all, it takes them years to
Yeah.
film. And then because they need to have the great, the direct footage.
Mhm.
And then so I was brought in, I think, in the spring of 2023.
Oh, wow.
And then I think and then like the conversation kind of stopped for a while, but I made it very clear to them from the get-go that I wanted to be involved, and they were very happy with that, obviously. And usually what I do is I worked on suites, like kind of um not necessarily a melody or theme, but like suites that's kind of be the ground for the rest of the score.
Mhm.
And so I didn't work on to any pictures when I did that. It was like a couple of suites. And I remember that we discussed the it's like one thing versus the other, and which is a very recurrent thing in this film. Like you have the cold, mesmerizing underwater world, and then you have the rough land that's being literally created out of volcanoes.
Mhm.
So it's a very so we had to work, through this with the music, and it was so great to be able to do it very early on because I could really do all the research and experimentation to get to a point that everybody was happy with. And then I think it was around maybe like early 2024 and then spring 2024 where summer 2024 when I started to actually work to pictures.
Mm.
So it was like a long um it was a long journey, but I think it's so great to be able to take all the time you need to it just feels like the score is gonna it's gonna have like a stronger, just more thickness and maybe a soul because it was yeah, because the process has been going on for so long. Like the the scores tend to have a like a bigger soul when you do that. So that's why I love to be brought in pretty early. But it's not necessarily the case all the time. And obviously you have to juggle other projects. It's not always just one. Yeah.
Yeah. And like you said, the visuals of the Galapagos are just wildly different between the water and the volcanic world. So in terms of a musical standpoint, do you have certain instruments that you reserved more for the underwater and then more for the volcanic on land parts?
Yeah, I basically use the same instruments. I just process them differently.
Oh.
And so I would just use, for example, for the Galapagos, it's funny because from the get-go, the filmmakers they were not really into giving too many clues on the location, which I totally get because you want to stay closer to nature. You don't want to give any human
Mm,
kind of made man-made clues, music clues that were just going to take us closer to the human world. They
mm,
really wanted to be closer to nature and to really what it is, like roughly. And so what I did is that I think I hope subtly used instruments from the location, from the Galapagos, in a way that they were so processed that it could really be many different countries, many different regions of the world.
mhm,
And so, for example, for the rough, as you said, like the raw volcanic land,
mhm,
and the water, well, I would process the instruments differently. For example, the charango would be very dry and rough when it comes to the land, and then it would be heavily processed for the underwater world with like, reverb and such. Um, so yeah, same instruments, just different processing.
Interesting. And I find it also kind of, I think what Disney does so well with these documentaries is that it feels like you're watching a story of like humans and people, but in the score, like you said, you don't want it to feel like it is just like humans have had an influence on it. So what does that look like in terms of like your sketches, your early concepts? Like, do you ever have to check yourself and be like, oh, I'm starting to sound like I'm aware of humanity or something like that?
Yeah, totally. And it is not an easy thing to do. It's just so easy to fall into just the clues because, as humans, we really want to relate to things. We want to be able to relate to things that are familiar. It's almost like an instinct, that we have that we just want to stick to the familiarity of something. And so it's so easy as composers to fall into that trap and then just go back to things that are going to feel familiar and like, oh yes, I know that this is like an instrument from Latin America. Oh yeah, I know where I am. I feel more safe now. It's really all about that. So it was, but at the same time, it's Disney, right? So there is a form of not predictability, but they have a certain way to shape their scores and their music, right? They have a signature, and so and again, it's almost like a fiction
Mm,
world that we have in our hands with the story of Leo. So it's a story, it's storytelling. So it has to have some um familiarity and like relatable things. So I really had to play between the two worlds. And I think that the filmmakers on that project and the producers were extremely helpful in that sense because they always kind of, guided me and they had very, very great instincts. And it really, really helped and made it so much easier. The
mhm.
collaboration process was a dream, to be honest. So it was interesting. And then also, as soon as you want like a melody or a theme, let's say for Leo, it is going to at some point go, lean towards Western music. And then it's I think the idea is just to play around textures and instruments and again processing
Mhm.
to kind of be both relatable and familiar, but also overworldly a little bit. So I really had to play in both fields at the same time.
Yeah, I read that you use instruments like an ocarina. I'm probably not going to pronounce the other two correctly. Charango and a
Yeah,
quena.
yeah,
Is
yeah,
that right?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like you
So
have to think that ocarina is the flute. Yeah.
okay, what are those for those who are not, I'm a band dropout, so I'm not
Cool.
what do those sound like? And then if you're trying to subtly, like obviously it's man-made instruments, but how do you give the feeling that they are kind of coming about naturally in terms of the theme for Leo, the lion?
Oh yeah. Well, it's funny because for Leo, the theme that I worked when I worked on the theme for Leo, it was piano based.
Mm,
So cannot go more Western and human than that. So it's funny because it was really I was just trying to play around the cuteness of this little animal.
mhm,
And so I started with the piano, and then I just took the theme to places where it was much bigger. So used more orchestral, textures and instruments. And then for the really traditional instruments, I tended to use them for very specific scenes and
mhm,
situations. For example, the ocarina, it's a very funny sounding flute, like really, that's what it is. And there are scenes in the film where you've got these birds who are making these weird movements with their heads and these like incredibly annoying sounds. They're hilarious. And I just found that the ocarina was a great instrument for them because it's like very sharp and short and just kind of silly if you play it in a certain way.
mhm,
So some instruments made like just complete sense and it was just so easy to lean towards them for certain animals like or when we have this big sea lion, an adult one, threatening one, who is defending its island. Well, I went from like a very like a tuba, and just making it sound a little silly as well and a little funny. So I think that instrumentation was more tied to situations and
mhm.
scenes rather than animals, really. And for Leo, I went full on traditional for Leo. I was like, I have to find these things with my piano. So I just started with the piano. And then there's this cute relationship between him and his mom.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, and that's when we entered a more traditional world of Disney, kind of music where it just feels familiar. It's a mom and her baby, and you kind of want to yeah, you kind of want to relate to that in this way. So that worked pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I did notice the tuba part because that was my instrument before I
Oh,
quit.
that's so cool. Oh,
Well, thank you so much and congratulations on the film. It's
thank
so
you.
I love the score. It's so sweet.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate Thank you for listening.
Absolutely. Yeah.